Right guys, talk about the Formula 1 news. The season opener is almost upon us. Ferrari are working hard back at the factory on their inverted rear wing concept to bring a version that can actually work on the car over the first few rounds of this season. But according to rumours, other teams, after seeing what Ferrari did in the Bahrain test, have also started work on a very similar concept, and apparently Red Bull might bring their version sooner than Ferrari's is ready. This does imply this is going to gain a significant amount of performance. Will all the other teams follow suit as well? Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. Firstly, wanted to start here. Yesterday we talked about a number of reports that suggested, due to there now being 11 teams in the pit lane rather than 10, they were set to reduce the pit lane speed limit in Melbourne from 80 down to 60. Now, apologies for the fake news on this, but I did see this reported all over the shop by multiple different people. That's not happening. The FIA say, don't know what you guys are yapping about. That's not true. So it's going to stay at 80, which I do think is a good decision, right? F1 teams have checked with race control because, of course, that does impact strategy. If the pit lane is slower, then the pit time takes longer. Therefore, a two-stop becomes far less viable. This, I think, as long as there aren't any crazy safety implications, which I didn't really see from adding an 11th team, this isn't relevant, so it stays at 80, which I think is a good thing around the season. It makes it more likely that we get more pit stops, which results in usually more entertaining racing. The other update from the FIA is this. So we actually saw this during testing, and just a brief graphic that they tried out. Now, of course, this is only a test graphic. We've got a Haas, we've got a Leclerc, Sector 1 doesn't look right. But the point is, these sector times. Now, if you guys have seen any of the live timing from Formula 1's API and all the data from during qualifying sessions, let's say, you can see real-time mini sectors. So typically, during a qualifying session, when we're watching the broadcast, we see green, purple, or yellow per sector, but we don't get to see the mini sector times. They do have them, they just don't show them on the broadcast. Apparently, though, this year they will be introducing them, which I think is probably a good thing. It is a little bit, well, it's going to change things somewhat because the mini sectors are often, purple, but also they can be yellow. If they're 100th down or 1,000th down on their previous attempt, it comes up as yellow, even if their whole sector was really quick. Maybe they're compromising one corner to go faster in another. The overall sector color gives you generally a better indication of how that sector went, rather than it being purple, yellow, green, kind of all over the place. It is very interesting, and we will see some laps that are like purple, purple, green, and it's like, wow, he's cooking, right? Which is exciting. But also, given that there's going to be changes in deployment strategy and when we're using super clipping, and that might change lap to lap. The engineers might be working away on how the engine's going to perform this lap. So I'm not sure it's going to give you the best picture necessarily, and also it takes away the excitement of like, well, how, Sector 1 he was purple, Sector 2, I've got the tension of watching this lap for the last 30 seconds, and I don't really know, maybe I've seen him, looks like he made a small correction, and then the lap time, and then it comes up purple again. So I think almost to watch, it's maybe more exciting only having the 3 in terms of the tension that it builds, but I guess more information could be better, so I see both sides of it. Interested to see what you guys think in the comments below. The other big update is on the state of charge. Now, you guys may remember in previous seasons when they would come up with the AWS estimated graphics, and it would be one guy had like 60% battery, the other guy had like 20%, and it was like, oh, he's attacking him, he's going to overtake. As far as I understand, all of those graphics were just made up, effectively, because they don't reveal the data from the battery to the broadcast. It's not public. And this year, though, that's a much bigger deal, right? Because previous years, it's been a reasonable deal to say, well, maybe one driver has more battery than the other, but the reality is 850 of the horsepower still come from the ICE. Both of them have an internal combustion engine. not making much difference. But this year it's a big deal, right? If I've got 100% battery and you have 10%, I will absolutely demolish you. And that is probably the key story when it comes to trying to commentate on the races, because overtaking is not getting done through DRS. It can be done through overtake mode, which they are also trying to show on the graphic in some way when they're using boost. I mean, boost is just standard electrical deployment. They'll be using boost all the time. Harvesting, or whatever they call it, that's of course when you're recharging, either through just braking for corners, or whether it's being done through super clipping, which is when you're running the engine directly against the battery, slowing yourself down deliberately to spin the motor. The overtake mode effectively is, if you're within a second of the car in front, you are able to deploy more energy than the guy in front is during the course of a lap, because there's limits on how much energy you can deploy at certain speeds. That changes for the car behind, but it requires you having energy to use. That's the key problem with overtake mode, as I see it, is that it requires the car behind actually has enough juice to... It's not like he gets an extra battery pack that he can deploy. It's the same battery pack. He is allowed to use more of it over a lap than the guy in front, assuming that it's fully charged. But arguably it won't be. And to get close enough to actually unlock overtake mode and to maintain it, you'll need to get within a second, which with dirty air could be a challenge and means that you're using more energy to catch up. So it's quite complicated. The point is that during the course of a race, electrical battery levels will be so critical to how everything is going. But they're not going to share that information with us on the broadcast. This, to me, is very much expected, because they don't want to reveal to other teams. That's the key thing. It changes the game drastically. If the other teams know the charge level of their rivals... I think in IndyCar, the teams know how much push to pass they have left. That is broadcast publicly, so the teams will know. But in F1, this is kind of a bigger deal. It changes strategy to a large extent. If you just know how much energy the other guy has, it changes strategy a lot, and the teams don't want to go down that route. So they're keeping all of that private. The teams are not going to be giving out the information live anyway on what their data looks like from the battery charge, which is going to mean it's a real challenge as a broadcaster to try and understand what's going on. Crofty will be looking at cars being like, well, maybe he's got more energy than the guy in front and he's going to go for the overtake this lap, but we genuinely have no idea. The only way you could possibly try and figure it out is to do some clever analysis based on the live speed of a car. Like you could look at and say, well, last lap he went to 70 kph through this corner. I guess it would be that high. Let's say he goes 150 through this corner, and then next lap he goes 135, well, it looks like maybe he was doing a bit of super clipping there, recharging the battery by using the engine against the MGUK so that he recharges more to maybe attack further. There could be some clever analysis done, and I'm sure the teams will try to do this, real time on the cars, to look at their GPS data and try to figure out where they're recharging. Are they recharging more here than somewhere else? I'm sure that's going to be done. But also, what if I'm behind a car, I'm in dirty air, and I have a slide? That's going to slow me down. That wasn't me clipping to try to recharge energy. That was just me suffering with the consequences of dirty air. So the teams will try to do these calculations. Whether Sky Sports will do those calculations in real time to try and give us some estimate of what the battery levels might be, probably not. So I think it's going to be very much so a guessing game, because even then it's like, oh, well, he's only a second behind, so he has overtake mode if he wants to use it, but he might not have enough juice to even take advantage of it. So I think it's going to be a confusing one to try and watch this year. That's the update. Obviously, the commentators are going to have to get used to it. It would be nice if we had access to the state of charge information. That would make the viewing experience, I think, significantly better. But I understand, apparently after several meetings between the FIA, Formula One management and the teams, they're not going to do it, because the engineers would have even more power and energy management knowing the status of other cars that they're battling. And, you know, that does make some sense. It also might make the racing worse, because if I know the guy in front has 55% charge and I've got 80%, then I can maybe go for it. If I know that he's got 20% charge, I can definitely go for it. But if I don't know, then and how much charge should I use? Is there enough risk in this overtaking maneuver? It's interesting. It's probably better for racing that the teams don't know what the other guys have. From an audience perspective, it's probably not as good. They've created some chaotic regulations here. That's all we can say. Whether it's good or bad, I guess we'll see. Now, F1 is back, so is F2. Just some graphics here of what we saw back in Monaco and various other races this season. This is Austria. There was some entertaining Formula 2 action last season, that is for sure, and it's officially back in action very shortly. Wanted to mention this just because Alex Dunn, former McLaren man, who actually caused, arguably, this whole pile-up in Monaco, he is at Alpine now. There was some rumours that Helmut Marko wanted him at Red Bull. In fact, that was one of the reasons given for why Marko was fired, was that he apparently went behind the team's back to try and sign Alex Dunn. Dunn was a very Marko-type character, fast, pretty crashy, caused a bit of chaos. But I do think a talented driver. He was with McLaren, he was gone, potentially because this opportunity was on the horizon. That never happened. Now he's joined Alpine. Interesting just to note, because I do think Dunn's talented. We know that Briatore is a character. Will Dunn be another victim of Briatore? Possibly. But also we saw in Drive to Survive, it's quite clear that the relationship between Briatore and Colapinto at least appears to be, to a large extent based on the financial relationship that they have, not necessarily so much the belief in Colapinto to be a quality long-term driver. So I wouldn't be overwhelmingly surprised if Dunn, if he does well in F2 this season, could be a consideration at Alpine next year. Just a story to keep your eyes on over there. Another big update, actually, coming out of this weekend is the following, because the teams, such as Ferrari and Racing Bulls, based out of Italy, they were really struggling based on their transport travel routes to get to Australia in time. It looks like it's going to be okay, but these were the two teams most affected. The crews stranded in Italy. They reached Melbourne via a UK charter, had to go all the way around the world. Some went via Singapore, some via LA. Bit of a mess, but they've made it. But it is a little bit sketchy, and with all the equipment and some of that stuff being delayed as well, they've decided to cancel the curfew so the teams can work later, earlier, whatever they need to do, basically, due to force majeure in this case that we haven't seen before. Couple of big updates. The other one is coming out of Mercedes. Petronas, the fuel supplier. We talked in recent days that there are some fuels that have been confirmed, have been homologated. We think that Shell with Ferrari might have been first there. This was a lengthier process than normal, just because the progress took longer. It's not just, oh, is this fuel sustainable? Let me test it. It's, is this fuel sustainable? And is your entire supply chain sustainable from top to bottom? Are we ensuring that you're not introducing more CO2, whatever the rules say? It's a longer process. This is not a couple of days or weeks. This is probably a months-long process to get these regulations confirmed. There were some rumours as to whether it'll be sorted for Mercedes in time for Australia, but according to rumours, it has been. The Petronas fuel has been homologated, and Mercedes are good to go with this power within their engine. The question is it going to be as good as the rivals? There's a lot of talk about Shell's biofuel at Ferrari, lots of talk about Aramco and their fuel for Honda. There was actually lots of talk about that pre-season, but it might not be relevant with the way that Honda engine is working. The point is that the Petronas fuel, maybe it caused some reliability issues for Mercedes that we saw in Bahrain, that we didn't see in Barcelona when we think they were using an older version, a hybrid version between last year's and this year's. But the fuel is certified, we think, and that will be good to go. Let's talk, though, about Ferrari, because some fascinating graphics being done here on, well, especially that plate that Ferrari have behind the exhaust and the implications of exactly that on the airflow. And as we mentioned the other day, you burn some of that airflow upwards, especially if you can invert that wing, as we've seen Ferrari do. That opens the door to some interesting airflow developments. But people weren't really talking about this. They were talking much more so about this, the inverted rear wing on that Ferrari, and it's still pretty remarkable to look at exactly what they came up with here. Now, as we talked about at the time, pros and cons to this design. The main theory is it's more weighty to do this, and also in terms of consistency, because you have to maneuver that flap within 400 milliseconds, and to do so 300 times per Grand Prix, because straight line mode opens every straight now. that is not necessarily an easy thing to accomplish. So Ferrari have a bit of work to do. But when they unveiled this, the question really was, did anyone else think of this? Was this just a Ferrari idea? Did other teams have this in mind? I think Williams said, yeah, we didn't think of that. That was clever. But other teams didn't maybe say all that much. The regulations are pretty clear that as long as it only goes between two precise positions and a couple of other details are passed, this is perfectly fine. Like, the gap is bigger. You can effectively do what you want with the top elements of the flap as long as it comes back to the same position and it only goes between two different positions. So Ferrari thought of this idea to invert it totally, to even create a little bit of lift at the rear wing from this upper element by inverting it, having a massive slot gap compared to what other teams can do. And the feeling is that this is worth a good handful of kph on the straight. There was talk about it being worth kind of 6 or 7 horsepower worth of power, so it could be worth a good few horsepower in a straight line. And when everyone saw this, people thought, well, looks like a no-brainer, right? Looks like this clearly is worth something, and there is a feeling that yes, it is, and Ferrari have a plan to create a version of this that they can run on the real car. Now, this version seemed to be a very early one. It was a pilot version. Based on the sources that we saw from Auto Racer the other day, the intention is to make this for sure for Montreal. They want to get a version ready for the 7th or 8th rounds in Canada in the towards the end of May. But they, in an ideal world, would have it ready for Bahrain, race 4. That's the current theory on what Ferrari are working on, but it's going to take them some time to get a real proper working version of this that they know is reliable, know is consistent. It also has to fail shut, as far as we understand. So, because if it was to fail, you need the higher downforce modes for safety reasons. That's more challenging to potentially secure in this manner. But according to rumours, they are not the only team working on such a solution. Rumours emerging that Aston Martin and Red Bull are working on a similar, I think, what did he call it? Macarena, Fred Vasseur called it, style rear wing to Miami in Aston Martin's case. And apparently for Red Bull, even as soon as Japan. So this is quite remarkable, right? Because Ferrari clearly have had this idea for some time. They've worked on this model. They brought the pilot test into Bahrain. Would other teams have also thought of a similar idea at some point? I wouldn't be surprised. I would be surprised if Ferrari were the only team to think of it. I think there were some other engineers that said, yeah, we thought of it, but there were too many compromises to make it make sense, so we went for a different approach. Now, Ferrari believe the compromises are worth it, and based on some of the aerodynamic analysis that I have seen, it seems that they're probably right. It does seem like this gives them some sort of edge, especially with that element behind the exhaust, seems to kind of exacerbate the benefit. So I think Ferrari will bring this, right? They're working on a version. They want to have a version ready for Bahrain, but it looks like Ferrari are pretty convinced the test worked. This is what we're going to do. Now, the other teams either saw the same thing and realized immediately, okay, we have to do this ourselves, or they already were working on this, right? It's interesting to wonder whether these other teams saw Ferrari do it and then thought, okay, like, we have to do something similar, or they've also been working on the same idea for some time. Because if Red Bull apparently are planning to bring a similar idea to Japan, that's only a few weeks away, right? End of March. So for them to get that ready in time, when it's going to take Ferrari longer, probably implies Red Bull had this idea in the works before and for longer. But again, there are complications with this type of design, and Ferrari figured those out, right? Well, maybe not yet, but they tested them in Bahrain. If the other teams also had this idea and they were convinced it was going to work, you'd have thought they might also have tested it in Bahrain. It was the perfect time. Run it on the car for a few laps, get the data, go back to the factory. The other teams copying this will have the Ferrari, at least the visuals of what Ferrari were doing, but they will not have had the ability to test it until they turn up to practice at one of these upcoming races. So tweet your thoughts in the comments below, but it does look like Ferrari's rear wing will get a version made by Red Bull and by Aston Martin. And if those two teams are working on such an idea, it's quite plausible that this becomes the standard in the regulations, which could give Ferrari an edge, because if it becomes the standard, it implies, one, it's better than the other version, which gives Ferrari potentially an advantage when they have it and for how long they have it over their rivals. Maybe Red Bull bring a version sooner than Ferrari do. Is it going to be as refined? These are other key questions. But who knows? Is the entire grid going to have inverted rear wings next year? Possibly. But again, maybe the FIA will say something about it if there's some sort of safety level that could be considered. Certainly if some of them aren't quite as strong as others. Enter your thoughts in a comment. Just one final thing for you all. It's been, well, confirmed. There's a list of presenters that have been confirmed for next year on Sky Sports, and a lot of the usual suspects you'd expect. But no Danica Patrick this year. So I know that some people like Danica Patrick's commentary, others don't. Jensen Button appeared to be one of those. And yeah, just some funny images doing the round here. But it doesn't look like Danica Patrick will be back on the Sky Sports broadcast this year. She's not there all the time anyway. Nico Rosberg's back always, like I like it when Nico Rosberg is on the broadcast on the weekend. He's always got something entertaining to say. Just actually one quick final thing before I forget about it. This weekend, Bottas is back in F1, but he received a penalty at the 2024 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. That penalty still applies. So just to keep you guys aware, it's probably not going to matter because Cadillac are going to qualify near the back anyway. But yes, Bottas will have a 5-place penalty this weekend, despite being out of the sport for quite some time. So Brian Watson, Twitter your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.